Yeah. Saw this year, but there's 3 deer bedded in that canoe. So maybe it's not near as complicated as I'm making it sound, okay?
It's in the cover I have back there. But they all disappear because the guys back on the property behind me come in and clear them out, and they clear them out with their human scent. So just be careful along these fence rows. You're not going to run into a lot of poison ivy on the trails that we're going to take back here. If you do the self-guided tour on the other property, watch out for the hickory trees. There's lots of poison ivy vines on them, but there's nothing on the trail. I made sure that any vines you see are grapevines, not poison ivy vines. But watch out for the hairy, bristly-looking ones that are wrapped around the hickory trees. This field over here is owned by a guy named Steve Burke. He lives down here on Addison Road. And the Burke family owns 3 farms right here, and they own a farm over by the lake. And these farms get heavily hunted by cousins and relatives and nephews and hay balers and just about anybody that asks permission that they know. So during October, I come and I park my vehicle right down there, and then I walk in. I park in that low spot, and so all the deer in this field see when it's in bean years is my vehicle pulling in. But on November 15th, 2 or 3 years ago, I pulled up on the corner, and there was a guy getting out about 5 o'clock in the morning. And what's he going to do? He's got a bean field, and it hasn't been picked yet. It's about that high in beans. You'll see some rock islands out there where the deer bed, and there's a point that runs out, and you can just see the woodlot there. A point that runs out into the field, and the field wraps around it. Well, that guy gets in the corner and walks across that bean field in the dark. And he's being seen by probably 3 or 4 families of deer and some bucks. And he's destroying all those bedding areas. But they're probably not going to see a deer in there in daytime in that field after November 15th, and I usually don't either. So that gets destroyed. And all the deer get pushed back in this property. Now, that when it's on corn, there may be deer in the corn, but they'll still come in and out of the corn all day long if they have the safety of our properties back here. So I hinge cut all along here, and you can see this tree right here. One of the things I want everybody to look for today, where did I see it at? All of this is getting heavily fed on. See the buds up here? When these trees first bud out, the deer come along here. There's some deer here on that one. One of the things to look for in this sanctuary that we're going to go through is the tens of thousands of new shoots that you're going to see coming up, and you're going to see stump sprouts. And just get used to looking at them. A lot of people ask me and Jake and other guys, you know, how can you talk to somebody about their habitat in another state? You know, you don't know what kind of trees are growing here. Well, I can walk into a woods anywhere in the country that has deer in it and tell you exactly what they like to eat and what they don't like to eat. You got a big deer population, they don't like to eat anything that's growing in the understory of one of those woods like Jake showed. But they love these trees along here, and you'll see as we walk through here, almost everything has been being nipped on. Huge amounts of browse. And Jake talked about habitat, and even along a fence row like this, you'll see that all the way. So I own 66 feet going back here, and this is a major issue in years when this is beans. I need to be able to get back there without upsetting the deer too much. They will see me occasionally, but this has grown up a lot more as we walk back in here. You'll see. Where we're standing here, we'll have native grasses this high. So I can walk, you know, about 10 yards in and not be seen from that field. Now that I mentioned native grasses, Dan Timmons is here, and he's got a lot of expertise in native grasses. And why don't we all turn around? This is my mother-in-law's CRP field, and Dan will talk a little bit about that. But you got to envision that stuff's 8 feet high. And
yeah, only a little bit. But I first planted native warm season grasses 13 years ago. This year, there's a variety of different ways to establish them. One of the key things with the plot of warm season grasses, you really got to burn them off about every anywhere from 4 to 6 years. Otherwise, they kind of develop a mat, and they kind of regress, and you don't get quite as thick a stand. I just burned mine this year, and last year was they were looking kind of a little bit on the weak side. The killer thing though is once when you do burn it, that's like the best growth you'll ever get the following year. As I look out in here, you can see this is a switchgrass right here that identified by the the way the tops look. They have very tiny little hard seed. Here's also in here. He has big blue stem. There's probably a little bit Indian grass. I saw. Right here. Yeah, I saw a little tuft of little blue stem. This looks like little blue right here. There, that looks like little blue stem, which adds a little bit of diversity to the stand. You drive by here before the grasses get too tall at night. There's tons of deer out here in this field. You see nothing but sets of eyeballs out in it, and once the grasses do grow up, obviously it gets used for bedding. I imagine quite quite significantly. And the warm season grasses are also pretty cool for sometimes those loner bucks who like to head out into them and hang out completely by themselves. And you can sometimes do little tactics within warm season grass stands to encourage other deer activity. You can go out with a backpack sprayer and some herbicide and just shoot little miniature deer beds. You can do a cluster of them in a high area for doe family groups, and you do a solitary one every here and there. Perhaps you could encourage a buck to use it. The other thing that I've done with them a little bit is to use a backpack sprayer in your warm season grasses to create very narrow little, deer width travel routes that they will use with a great deal of comfort because they're pretty much invisible as they move through them. And you can use that if you're a little bit creative to get them to go where you'd like them to go when they enter or exit the grass stands. Your local NRCS office is a wealth of information for assistance in establishing warm season grasses. A lot of the ground you see in southern Michigan that's in warm season grasses is enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program also, which is a pretty neat program for converting row crop ground into deer habitat. It will generate income for you that in many, many cases will exceed the compensation you're able to get by renting your ground out for row crops. And you can also get approval within your CRP contract to establish wildlife food plots on that CRP ground within or around your warm season grass stands. Jim Strader, I just saw him. Where is he? Raise your hand, Jim. He's a king of warm season grasses. He has his property near Charlotte or Olivet in that area, and he has spectacular stands of warm season grasses, and he has some of the best upland bird hunting left in the state of Michigan. Gorgeous property he has. And are you licensed to burn yourself, Jim? I know you're pretty good at that sort of thing, aren't you?
I don't need a license. Just give me a match.
It's just a match. If you're brave enough, you can burn these stands off yourself. We all have a little bit of pyromaniac in us.
we hired the Addison Fire Department to burn those. They do a nice job.
Yeah, you know, some township fire departments will do that kind of thing. A number of them will. My township won't.
I think it was 500. They burn half under and half in the next.
Dan, would now be a
mowing
good,
helps too. You can mow in August
Yeah.
usually if you're on a CRT program.
Good question?
would now be a good time to burn?
No.
It's probably a little late now. It's probably a little late.
You already got ducks and nests,
Yeah.
and pheasant nests and everything out there now. It's way too late.
Yeah, we're in May. You want it by what end of April or so in most years.
I'd say as soon as the snow goes off.
That's a good time to do it. I've done it in late April and been okay. Now there's another way to go. It's not the greatest year burning for deer, but you can also do a fall burn. And a fall burn is better for your grass stand if you're looking at destroying woody vegetation and perhaps encouraging more forbs or wildflowers to be in your grass plot. Most warm season grass mixes that get sold have a wildflower component in them, which is cool as hell the first few years of establishment, but my experience is that the wildflowers get out-competed not too many years. Some persist longer than others. Mine are pretty much gone. Every once in a while I'll get a gray-headed coneflower which will show up, but they pretty much had it. They do get out-competed by the warm season grasses. I
This one's
understand.
11 years old, and it has purple coneflower and black-eyed Susan and partridge peas that still bloom, but not nearly like they did in the early years.
You have to look. In mine, you have to really look for them. But in the first few years, it's just spectacular. And I understand you can get those wildflowers to persist by doing tactics like employing a heavy disc earlier in the year, trying to disc the daylights out of the stand. It disturbs the soil more and it creates more stress on these rhizomes in the warm season grasses, and also with fall burns. A lot of deer guys don't like to do the fall burns because the whole reason they got the grass stands is to provide 6 foot tall grass into the autumn. But it's something that you might do on a rotational basis. Anything else?
I want to think about putting buffer zones in, buffer areas around your plots so that you can, when you do go to burn, that you're a lot safer.
Like for a fire break, to have something around the perimeter of your warm season grasses that's growing green. I know there's a guy not far from here that has warm season grasses that he planted bird's foot trefoil around all of the perimeter of his grass stands, something to maintain its greenness so you can. And depending on how wide you go with that fire break zone, you have a greater degree of comfort once you do torch the thing.
And that can be included in the CRP program too. They've got a seed mixture in the edge. It's alfalfa, in Hillsdale County it's alfalfa, clover, and what's that grass? Not Timothy, but
fescue too.
Crazy grass. So I accidentally had my sprayer going and didn't realize it with clethodim in it, and got rid of some of that grass accidentally. So you don't want to tell the USDA office you're doing it. Anybody here from the USDA? I don't own that property anymore.
What was that?
Okay, what we're going to do next, we're going to walk, see that big oak tree there? We're going to walk into that lane down there, and we're going to walk through a string of food plots on the south end, and we're going to look at the south corridor. I told you there are 3 deer corridors there.
Cut it up. So instantly I had 3 buckets full of rhizomes I could go somewhere else with. So if you're even thinking of miscanthus and you got an old garden plot or an old piece of ground that you have nothing going, put it in. And then you can work from it. See what I'm saying?
Nursery.
Yeah, in 4 years, I had 3 5-gallon buckets full of big chunks of it, which I didn't put into an area that I want to screen myself. So if you're not familiar with miscanthus, just get a little bit and start it.
What time of year did you dig that up and cut it off?
I just did it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, it hadn't sprouted. It's sprouting now.
Yeah.
And then what I did...
We're standing on the edge of a small oak savanna right now. And you can see these oak trees in here. There's a few maples still standing in here, but over the years I've cut out the maples. I want to introduce Eric Bullard here. Eric worked with me last year. And what we're trying to do is reconstitute a oak savanna. This is the way oaks are supposed to grow. You guys that have this reverence for these oak stands where you've got oak stems 10 feet apart from each other and they reach up 50, 60 feet and then they have little teeny crowns and they don't make any acorns to speak of and you don't want to cut them, you have to cut oak trees to grow acorns. So many of these woodlots, the trees get close together. This is the way the swamp oaks are supposed to grow. This is the way they grew before we came and stopped the fire. Typically, the way an oak savanna is formed is these oak trees will be mixed in with maples and other species that are less fire resistant, more fire sensitive. And fires would come through, either the Native Americans would set them or lightning set, and every so often these would get burned and the competing species would get burned out. Now this area happens to be pretty close to a true oak savanna right now, and there's a true oak savanna on the other end of it. But in between were all these oak trees. See all those oak tops through there? And we cut hundreds of competing maple trees out of there to reconstitute this savanna. And we're not dragging those maple trees out. We're leaving them laid because we want this structure and cover for this southern corridor here. So this is the bottom corridor on that map of the 3 corridors for this east-west movement of deer. And we want as much cover in here as we can get. If you walk into that area, Eric and I cut lots and lots of maple trees out of there last year. You literally, in a sea of maple seedlings about this high, and you can't quite see them from here, and we can't walk across there. But starting right at where you can see those down trees kind of pointing this way, right behind that, there are tens of thousands of maple saplings growing up. It's a food plot for deer. And there's stump sprouts, and deer much prefer stump sprouts to ground sprouts. The stump sprout will grow a leaf that big, just full of being fed by a root system that goes way down. And don't kill your stumps if you do something like this. They're not competing that much. I hear so much, and I know there's a forester or two here that's, probably going to be a little ticked off at me. Deer hunters kill too many stumps in their woods. You have to decide, am I going to grow trees or am I going to grow deer? And there's an in-between. If I actually brought a logger in here and tried to get him to take the maples out, and he wouldn't do it. They're not worth anything to him. Or they can't get in here very good. They wouldn't even get the walnuts off of the mother-in-law's property there because there weren't enough of them. So if you're into deer hunting, if you really bought your property for deer habitat, don't kill those stumps. A junk tree to a forester is candy to a deer. Box elder tree, basswood tree, mulberry tree, those are candy to a deer. It's a sin to kill them, in my opinion. If you bought your property for deer, if you bought your property to grow timber, that's great, grow the timber. But if you want optimal deer habitat, you cannot grow timber and grow optimal deer. You can get in the middle. You can usually make a woods better by doing select cuts or timber stand improvement. You can make it better for wildlife. But if you want to take it to an extreme for wildlife, you're going to see what you're going to see when we get back in here. We can't quite get to it, but like I said, there's tens of thousands of new trees. All that energy was up 50 feet above the ground, and now it's down here. And now these oak trees will be able to suck in energy because they're not competing with the maples anymore, and they'll produce those great big fir oak acorns that are golf ball size. Now, this is what you want. Now, this is a C shape, and we're gonna go right through here and stop in a food plot there when we leave. We'll just stop in that food plot for a couple minutes. But I know that there are questions about what we saw as we were walking in. Alan?
Yeah, just on the white oak, I have a hard time finding the nuts up there. What do you think on years? Every third year, fourth year?
That's what they say, yeah. What I do is I go out and scout my trees to know which ones, because these turn into social centers like you won't believe. Wherever the oak trees are producing acorns in October, there will be each oak tree that has little limbs like this. See, you don't get little limbs like that in a regular woodlot. but they'll get scrapes because this ground will be dry in October.
Fertilize, Jim?
Huh?
Throw some fertilizer on them, or
You can, yeah.
Results of doing that are kind of nifty. Not much
Right.
evidence that
I'm worried about people that are going to go home and not take a shower. I'm going to scrub myself to, I'm going to remove a skin layer. The pellets that you saw coming in, I'm going to make a trail back to the edge of that bedding area so I can set up in one of those oak trees. And that'll allow me to walk. The risk, no matter how good your scent control program is, if you walk on vegetation like that, that's when they're going to pick you up. The firmer a ground that you can walk on, the less chance that you're going to create ground disturbance that gets their attention. For the most part, when I get a deer's attention, it's just ground disturbance. There's no scent whatsoever on my boots. I can walk through there. They'll come and sniff it, and they're so good that they figure out which direction you were walking because it gets fresher this way and it gets older this way, and then they'll follow up in the fresh direction. But they don't know what you're doing. If I've made a mistake, and I got a video of a mistake I made last year, and it'll usually happen in vegetation like that swamp grass out there, they're more likely to pick it up because there's more surface area there that you transfer. So you'll notice the trail we just came through is a deer trail, but it's a lot wider than we usually create the deer trails. Usually we'll just lay a strip of herbicide down to keep that. We'll go through once a year, cut it back in August, put a little strip of ground clear through there. But we want the bucks to feel like they're brushing their shoulders against something when they walk through. Now when you see the human path, like you saw a human path up here to walk up to that meadow stand that we went past, that is so wide, we don't want to so much as brush against a leaf like that. If we do, we're dead meat. Our trail in is dead meat. And I mean even if you're wearing a scent line, because it's a forest material, and you brush against that plant and you're done for. And I've watched the deer respond to that sort of thing.
a little embellishment, if I could,
Yep.
on the Hinge oaks. These are oaks from the white oak family, swamp white oak or fir oak. They hinge with a far, in my experience anyway, far higher degree of survivability than oaks from the red oak family. And they're in fact wonderful hinging trees. This is an excellent example of it. You can see these trees are remaining alive. And if you said this already, Jim, I apologize, but these trees will produce more deer food in the mode that they are in than they would ever produce in the form of sporadic acorn crops. And highly preferred deer food.
Yep. I'm going to talk about the property line here. You see where those cottonwoods are. There's a tree line that runs right along here. See the open sky there? When I bought this place, you could see 100 yards out through this direction. There was a little bit of thick stuff in the hawthorn area. These are hawthorn trees that are arching above you. This is a good white oak tree. It's not growing 3 feet from 15 other white oaks. So we're going to preserve that. That's a beauty. And its branches are reaching out. We've created a hole in the sky. I'm telling you, this was all shaded in here, and there was no understory, no food for deer whatsoever. We mowed this. If you look behind Luke over here, see all those saplings coming up? What species do you think those are?
Ash.
They're white ash. We have far more ash trees than we ever had before, even though all the mature ones have grown. I don't know if Mother Nature's trying to reconstitute them or what. The deer love those ash trees. You can see the tops are nipped off, a lot of them. That one's stubbed off a little bit, but you can see a lot of browsing on these ash trees. We are going to take this area and apply a Jim Ward approach to it. Cut out a few of these hawthorn trees. These hawthorn trees are like deer candy too. I mean, the deer just absolutely love them. When you stump them off and let the stump growth come up, they'll eat very heartily on it. Then we'll come in here and we'll kill everything with backpack sprayer, and then we're going to plant food in here, chicory and rye and that sort of thing, and give the deer something to jump up and feed on during the daytime. They will still move in and out of this sanctuary because they don't want to get stuck in here at night. And this is something to really understand about deer behavior. They don't want to be in heavy cover like this at night. They can't escape predators. If they take off running, they run into a hawthorn tree and stab themselves in the heart with a thorn. They want to be out in the middle of an open field using their superior night vision to see the predator coming from a long distance, and they can break into a run and escape them. So at night, they're bedding in those fields. They're bedding in the bean fields, bedding in the cornfield. In the daytime, they're in here. And it doesn't matter. I put out a video, some of you may have seen a few years ago. Don't be afraid of the corn, because those deer do not want to be in the corn. They can stand right there and eat 10 different species of plants. Corn is boring to a deer. If they're in the corn, you put them in there. They come in and out of the corn all day long on this property. And the best buck sightings that I've ever had on the property, 5 bucks up to 5.5 years old, all within 40 yards of me, with 380 acres of corn within, I think it was 300 yards around me in various directions. They all 6 were out there. There were 6 of them. 3 1.5-year-olds, a 2.5, a 3.5, and a 5.5. The biggest buck I've ever seen in here. I couldn't get a shot at him. That was in October. So there's corn in every field around here. So if they're in the corn, they don't want to be there. They want to be here, because there's 50 different species of plants that they can eat in here. But we're going to grow some real luscious protein food, and we're going to follow the Jim Ward approach on that sort of thing. Now, if you look off in this direction, those cottonwoods mark the property line. And if you look up, you see a giant hole in the sky. Looking in that direction, you could see for 300 yards in the summer, before we came in here and did this. And we cut this. All the hinge cutting that you saw as we were walking in here, we did in 2010, March or April of 2010. I did it with Dan Middlestadt. And so you can see all the robust growth we got in here, all the food that we have in here. You can see a maze of trails around us. We're in a hub right now, and there's at least 6 or 7 deer trails feeding into this area. And if you look around here, here's a deer trail right here, and it's heavily used. I haven't done anything to that trail. Once they start using the trail, they'll browse it back and keep it open if you have a high enough deer population. This is like, if you were to draw a map of trails, there's trails in here every 20 or 30 yards, every single direction you walk. They're crisscrossing all over in here, because this is where they want to be. Most woodlots, guys think a deer trail is sacred. Oh, don't chop a tree on that deer trail. The deer are using it. Well, what are they doing? They're going from one end of your property to the other on a single line. You don't see all these crisscross trails. As we go north from here, you're going to see there are trails every 15 or 20 yards. The deer are just crisscrossing in here. If you follow each one of these trails, you just walk through a doe bedding area here. But by the way, it's not sex specific. If there's a bachelor group in August, September, October, they'll use those bedding spots as well, because they stay in a group that time of year. But if you follow up any of these, you'll find beds just like those in here. We're not going to walk by a lot of beds today because we're staying on a main trail. Another thing to know about that trail is that's much wider than that trail usually would be. And there are at least 8 or 10 trails like that all dump out so that the deer can move parallel at the same time out of here without waiting in line for each other. We want them to all be moving towards the food at once in the evening, and all coming back on different pathways. If you have a narrow funnel coming out of here, the doe families have to wait on each other. They're in competition with each other. They'll string it out, and they'll come out one at a time, and the bucks can stand in one place and check out every doe family. So we want the does moving, and we see the buck movement is going to be perpendicular to the doe movement. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So property lines over there, No deer in its right mind is going to walk in that direction after hunting season starts in the daytime. The neighbor over there says, you know, I don't know how you guys are killing these deer because I got them over here. I see them, but they're always at dark. And I was standing there talking to him in my barn, and he was wearing his hunting boots in my barn. And I said, right there's the reason why. You walk through there one day in hunting season, and you're not going to see deer in there. So this gets heavily hunted by trespassers. And so we came through, Dan and I, and we hinge cut every tree for about 75 yards thick all the way along that property line. A couple of years later, the trespasser I've known very well for many years, nice guy, he's a good hunter. He says, my boys won't even follow a deer in there. It's too thick. So the deer can move through there, but they won't in daytime. They're going to move in that direction to Eric's property in daytime because they feel safe over there. And they'll move to the Burke property in daytime up until November 15th, and then they forget about that, except right at the break of dawn. Any question about any of this?
I have one question.
Availability to get a track kidder with a hydro axe on for clearing some of this. Would you recommend, Dave, on grinding this all up, making a bigger area? Or?
The thicker the better, as far as I'm. Now, it can be too thick, and Jeff Sturgis talks about this a lot. It can get too thick, and I've got some areas that are too thick down here that we're going to thin out this year. But this here's, I mean, look at it. There's a deer trail there. 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 They can escape in any direction from any place in this woods. So making it more open. There are areas that are more open, and we're going to walk through a little bit more open area.
Like
now,
this thorn bush right here on the tree, you're going to just all this down, just take a tractor, just push it in the bush?
No, we'll do it by hand. We can't get a tractor in here anymore.
And then you're going to put a pool spot right in this, we're saying right here in this area.
Yep.
You gonna leave the fruit tree again?
Yeah, we'll leave the apple tree standing. You had a question over here.
I did.
Yeah.
Hinge cutting your property line. Would you still do that?
Would I still do it?
Yeah.
No, heck yes.
Because Jim talked last week about he kind of has mixed reviews about it because you're creating an edge for the property owner too, and they can create traps.
I don't mind that it makes their hunting better, and it probably does make their hunting better. I just don't want them. They shoot it if it goes off my property. I don't want them shooting into my property.
I did.
And I want the deer. I call these sentinel bedding areas, and I have them bedded right on the property line. And what I like is to put lots of buck beds right along the property line, and I want my young bucks bedding there, so that they're sensitive to those hunters walking in there, and they'll come in this direction rather than going out their direction. That's a way that I really think a lot of my other Hillsdale County property had bedding all along the property lines wherever I had an opportunity to do it. I really like to put the deer there because I know that most of the hunters around that property are sloppy hunters. They're going to go back in their four-wheelers and they're tramping back with their lights on at, daybreak, and the deer are where they're there, and these young deer are not very sensitive, so if they're bedded in the middle of my property, they could just wander out there. But if they're bedded right on the edge of the property, they're more aware of what's going on in there. I'm a strong believer in that, and I haven't talked to Jim about that.
Well, I have the same views, but then Jim kind of had me question how he talks about that creating an edge, and I started thinking about it because I have ag on both sides. The deer can go both directions, and they're mostly gun hunters, so they could just get lucky, and I'm creating an edge for them to follow down now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's.
When they're not in there every day till opening day.
I think the upside is greater than the downside.
Yeah.
And I think, and I know the deer traffic in here in the morning, it's always going to be coming towards the east. In the evening, it's always going to be towards the west. In December, they start going south a little bit after the fields are opened up over here. Other questions? Okay, what we're going to do next, we're going to thread our way through, right down that trail that's marked there. And on your left, you're going to see a aspen area that was hinge cut in 2011. I came in myself one afternoon, cut a couple hundred trees in a couple of hours, and hinge cut all those trees. So much better than a clear cut to leave those aspen trees. They won't live. Most of them won't live. But if you can get them hung up on the stump, you've created structure in there. Within 3 months, the saplings were this tall. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one. So if you got a neighbor that
gives you a hard time while driving trespassing or whatever. You just drop a bunch of trees along his property line and keep the deer on the inside.
Crisscross them. Well, what you're doing is, the main thing you're doing is letting light in. With all this hinge cutting, it's all about letting, it's not, a hinge cut tree never survives. You'd still be better off because you're creating structure and you're letting light in. It's all that thorny stuff that grows up that keeps the trespassers out. They're lazy.
Yeah.
So we're making a thorny wonderland for them. And if you see all the, you wouldn't want to walk through some of the stuff that was along the trails that we came in on because you get all cut up. By the way, watch out for the multiflora rose because it has reverse thorns.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Any other questions?
Yeah, our hunters.
Okay, we're going to
Long
have...
fingers to go. And I have 3 property owners on both sides. And I can I created that for them too on other things.
Make a little bedding area right here, and our goal here is to thicken this area up. So we're going to come cut some of these big cottonwood trees here down. They're not worth anything. We'll cut them down. We'll cut them at a level where the deer can feed off the stump sprouts that'll surely come from them. They really like cottonwoods. Cottonwoods will sprout real fast. Once we get these tops out of here, this will grow up into heavy cover, and we want to make bedding. If you look behind you, there's some walnuts there. And this is one of the things about making neighbors like Luke. He and I came in and cut those walnut trees down, and I know some of you are cringing. We don't care. We care about deer. We don't care about making $100 on that walnut tree. If we were to come and build a structure, we might pay $100 for it. Some of you guys buy snow fence, you pay $50 for 50 feet of it with one of those walnut trees. If it's worth $100, 15 or 20 years from now, it's worth me cutting down now and using it for structure for the deer because I care about deer. The problem with that area, or the beauty of it is, Luke and I went and cut. We didn't even know exactly where the property line was. We went from his property to mine, and we're helping each other and creating a bedding area, shared bedding area, because we both know that we're not going to come in here during the season. The only time Luke's been in here is when he heard a gunshot go off right there at that corner with this other property, and he walked across here. I was on the other side of the swamp and couldn't get through it, so he was able to walk over here and give these guys some
encouragement
to not come in this direction. Will, you're not here, are you? My neighbor that owns this property. Some of you now, we're going to build a bedding area right here. And this whole area is going to be bedding in a few years. After we get rid of these cottonwood trees, we let all this grow up, and we're going to expand this bedding area. And part of what we want to do is stop intrusion. Now, we have a real problem here because that's a right-of-way there along that drainage. And I can't grow trees in there or anything. Luke tried to grow trees next to it a few years ago, and they came and wrecked them. So that has to be left open. What I do is grow food all along it, and I will grow some sorghum Sudan grass periodically through it this year so that they don't have that long a sight line. But the advantage to having food all along there is not only do the deer use it all day long because they dump out of this sanctuary, and I said they have to eat 2 or 3 times a day, but when they bring their heavy equipment through every 2 or 3 years to clean up the drain, they just drive right through my property because I've already got it cleaned up for them. So they don't mess with my stuff too much. So this is going to be bedding. We're going to start with a base tree, and it's going to be this one right here. We're going to drop it right on Dr. Steve's head, just about. We want it to hit that scraggly tree. Is that a hawthorn tree? We want to kill the fall of this tree. These maples will break off a lot. I'm going to cut about 70% of the way through the tree and stop before it falls on its own if I do it right. I'm going to make a flat back cut, and a lot of you have heard me talk about that. You always want to have a flat back cut because if that tree leans back on you and you have an angled back cut, it'll break off at the hinge, slide forward, and fall backwards. So you want a flat back cut because if the tree does lean back, it'll pull up on the grain and it'll stay in place if you've left enough wood there. So we're going to make a flat back cut about 70% of the way through the tree, and we're going to follow it right on these smaller trees. These smaller trees are the ones we want to use to finish the bed, but we want this to fall on them to cushion its fall so it doesn't break off. If it does break off, we're going to get about 15 guys under it and pick it up and set it back on its stump. But we could get a tractor in here to do that. or you can use a come along to do that. But we very often do that, and if that breaks off, we'll just cut a little notch in here, we'll lift it up, and it'll stay there for years. So we need this as a base tree. The other thing is, if it breaks off, it has enough of a crown that we could use that as a base too. What we want is these smaller saplings, as they fall onto there, to not go past horizontal. We want them to be leaning slightly upward. We're going to create a dome-shaped structure here if we're successful. We're not always successful. The beds that we make in here, I've come through with a video camera and looked at every bed that we made in here in the postseason, and 90% of them get used by deer. You can tell because they're matted hair in them, tracks in them. They will use the beds we make. The only ones they don't use are ones where a tree fell down on it or blocked in access. They have to have escape paths. So we're going to make a dome structure here. Then we would come in and rake this out. Now this is wet in here right now, but it won't be wet in August, September. And that's when the deer will start dumping onto this property. So I'm going to get my gear on. For this tree, we're going to ask you guys to move back a little further, and then once we get this tree down, you can move in closer to watch it. Okay, I got a little problem here. Is this sapling is in the way, and if I drop this tree with this sapling here, it's going to put energy on the tree, and I could have a disaster. So I got to cut through that first. I'm just going to cut it forward. I'm really cautious with trees like that because it's those 3-inch saplings that are bent like that. They can snap and give, and you know, it's like a baseball bat hitting you. That's how a lot of people get killed, is with these little track saplings that are sprung, and they have a lot of energy in them, and they just whack back up at you. We can just cut up high enough on the tree. I can, but I want to cut from that side, and I'm going to bump into it.
It's only a couple weekends a year it's crowded. After that, there's only 3 or 4 guys. Half the learning part is making a fish. You know,
How much cleanup would you do in there, Jim?
We'd do quite a bit.
On the bottom?
Go in and cut out all those lower branches. And we would rake out spots, make sure they can get in and out, and we would keep working our way back away from this. If we're going to do this whole area, we'd come in and cut all these big maple trees down first, and those cottonwoods, and then we would come through and make these structures. You have a lot more cover surrounding it then. And deer probably wouldn't use this right now because you can see too far out here, or see them from too far. So we'd want these trees all down, and within a year you'd have a gray zone all through here. Any questions?
Yeah, before we do any of this, wouldn't you get rid of all the crap?
All of the big trees.
Yeah, all the cottonwoods are gone, right?
Most of the cottonwoods, unless they're going to fall on the neighbor's property.
Well, he don't mind. He's right here.
That's a different neighbor. Huh?
Did you leave the whole tree there?
Oh, absolutely.
When you hand cut in the winter, do you have more apt to snap them off because they froze, or you better wait until the sap starts running so they're more flexible?
I've cut down to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And, you know, there's freezing point suppression because there's a lot of salts and sugars and all that in the tree. And so they're resistant to a lot colder weather than you and I are. But there may come a point, I can tell you I've cut maples down to 9 degrees. You got to realize the heat of the saw is helping too.
I did about 50 of them last year in January. 90% of them snapped off. I just couldn't get them to fold. They'd start going and then they just boom, and then to rip it right away from the tree, and I didn't know it was...
What was the temperature?
Snow was on the ground. I don't know. I was sweating, but with the chainsaw, you sweat with it too.
Yeah, we cut all the time in January. I wouldn't say there's a big difference. Sometimes we'll come in a summer day and those maples will break off like crazy. So,
how do you feel about girdling some of the trees? They kill the tree but leave it stand.
I want a tree to fall where I want it to fall, not where it wants to fall. So I don't girdle trees. I say that knocking on wood because you guys passed a girdled tree earlier, which one I didn't feel safe cutting. But I don't like having trees that are going to fall down on their own. We have all these ash trees that are falling down on their own, and it's a headache. Take it down where you want it now. Why girdle it? The only good argument I know of for girdling is if you're really into other kinds of wildlife, woodpeckers and things like that, and you want that tree to be a standing monument. But it'll attract all those critters laying on its side too. Leaving these trees is not bad stewardship. My opinion is it's bad stewardship to take a tree this size and skid it out of the woods. It's full of potash. If you let it rot, you got $10 of potash in a big maple tree like that. Cover. What am I willing to pay for cover for a piece of snow fence or something like that? They have value on the ground. That log right there is going to remain moist right into the summer. Where this ground's all going to dry up, you roll that log over and there will be grubs and earthworms, and that brings critters in to eat the grubs and earthworms, and those critters crap out seeds, and you'll see all kinds of extra seeds being pooped out here. You're a good steward of the land if you let that tree go back to the land where it came from. You're actually taking from the land when you skid that tree out and trade it for little pieces of green paper, in my opinion. And not that I won't sell trees, I will. But I'm trying to bring all that up there that's useless for deer down here. It's got to be 5 feet or lower. And you just walk through an area that used to look like this. And we're going to make this look like that. And we do that by leaving those trees in place. They create shade, keep the soil moist, attract critters. Deer come in and crap in here. What's that? Fertilizer. It goes in one end and out the other. So we're going to create all kinds of food in here, and we're going to nourish this soil. We're not going to kill off the so-called junk trees, stumps, because they're drawing minerals and nutrients from way down below the soil and bringing it right up to the top. The only reason people kill those junk trees is because they want to grow a tree that's 100 feet tall. to trade it for money. We're stewards of the land. I think leaving these trees on the ground is better for my land than skidding them out. I can get nothing but pallet wood for these maple trees. And I don't know if I can get anything for cottonwoods. Anybody know that? Yeah, so they're worthless. But you drop those trees, crisscross them in here, and you've got deer structure. Highly valuable deer cover.
Would you do anything to the log once it's dropped, like cut notches to direct the deer through or anything like that?
Oh yeah, we cut through them all the time. Yeah, I was cutting with Jim Ward last week. We dropped them right across Jake's road, and then we just come through with a chainsaw afterwards and cut them back. So you can shape it however you want. You have a chainsaw in your hand. That's the beauty of it, once it's sideways. Other questions about the hinge cutting?
You ever get competition from the cool season grasses that over compete with the woody browse that you're wanting?
Yes.
I mean, is there ever a reason to come in and spray with cleth early in the year, spring, so that woody?
And we're not going to go across the creek, but I'm not down that way about 300 yards. I've got encroachment. I got a hinge cut area that Randy Vanderveen and I did. Some of you have seen the videos of it a few years ago. That is getting encroached with reed canary grass, and I'm going to go in there and kill it, spray it yet this year. Spray it, disturb the ground, and you'll get stuff growing up in it. I put food plots in the reed canary grass too. Go in late July, I'll mow it, let it dry out, burn it, create a little fire break around it, burn it, and then I just toss the seed on top of that. And that burned duff creates, what do you call it, mulch.
Is clethidim the way to handle that, though?
It depends. If you've got other woody stuff growing
that's
up,
already in there,
you want to use the clethidim. If it's just new, you just hinge cut it last year and you're seeing those grass come up, come in with glyphosate and spray the whole thing, and then come back periodically as needed with cleth. But ground disturbance is super important for reed canary grass because the reed canary grass creates mats, doesn't let anything come up. You'll see 100 maple trees in an area like this if you disturb the ground in reed canary grass, at least on this property.
What's cleth do?
Kills any
grass only. Grass only?
Grasses, yeah. Other questions? Okay, what we're going to do next, we're going to walk out into this food plot. You can take a look at the drain. No pike spearing. They do come up in here once in a while. And you may see a walleye in there too now and then. If the water's deep enough, they make their way up in here. We're going to walk down this way, and you're going to be looking for a yellow ribbon on the right, on the left, and we're going to go through the boneyard, which is a natural bedding area. Look for rubs in there. There's probably 150 rubs visible where we're going to go through. It's just thick with deer in the fall. How much longer we got?
Is this big scraper area here?
Yeah, see how he pulls down, like see how they chewed that off? He'll tie these down at in late August, down more, and
you guys are pretty firm believers in just make.
We're going through the boneyard, and this is where the deer come to be by themselves. No one bothers them in here pretty much all year round, and especially during deer season. We came through here with the brush, DNR brush mower, yeah. You'd have never been able to, walk through here. We cleared the path. Now, one of the things Jim wanted to point out is we're only, there's the drone messing around up there, but we're only 30 yards in.
Yeah.
At most maybe 50 to, all the way up to 10 yards from that food plot, and you can't see it.
Just laying in here? Or
they come in here, and this is all rubbed up. There's rub trees everywhere through here that you really can't see right now.
but if you were to walk through there, there's a lot of rubs, and the buck's laying here. So you can see that.
Oh yeah.
Trails.
Everywhere.
A lot of deer come here to die when they get shot. I don't want to do it.
Where does he walk in from?
There's a huge trail right there.
From behind. Oh, okay.
A people trail, which is different from this, and this is usually you wouldn't be able to walk it.
So if he's right here, he's got like a northwest wind right here then?
He hunts this in any wind, probably.
Because he's so high up?
No, because he's so scent free. If you go back to the barn, he'll show you the scent free room.
What do they do with his boots? Like, how does he?
They're in a tub, separate, and they never get used.
Just sit, unless he's going hunting.
And that's the stand I was in when that curved buck came from the next door property. I could see him from about 350 yards away. Came under my big oak tree over there and came right past that stand. I moved my camera to go to another window to watch him, and he heard it and skedaddled that way, or he would have kept going right towards my grandson, which was painful for me, but it was my fault for making the camera squeak. This is the tree. The giant oak is my favorite place to sit. If you've seen a video I made of a day in a travel corridor, that was it. I don't know how many bucks I saw that day, 15 or 18. Some of them were repeat visits. The oldest one was 2.5, and I was surrounded all day long by brown bodies, all day long. A couple hours gap in the middle of the day. This food plot gets so heavily used, it's unbelievable. Anytime, if I come out at midday, and I usually don't, but if I try to crawl up in one of these stands at midday, I usually have deer that I'm watching while I'm doing it. So these deer are using this food all day long. The bedding is right there. They usually use that end of the plot during the daytime, and they're going to come out of that sanctuary area and feed for a half an hour or so, and then they'll go back in. So this gets used all day long. This is super dense cover over here. This is where I killed the stranger from that tree, 18 yards out. And that cover in there is so heavy that you're just going to see deer passing up and down there all day long. In a morning sit, which I usually do morning sits at this stand, I'll sit there until about 8:30 usually, and I'll see one doe family at a time coming across here. Sometimes they'll cross the grass fields, but usually they're going to come through this heavy cover and use this corridor. And the bucks are moving perpendicular, checking all these pathways and going back and forth. They'll usually run a circuit around this grass field here. These grass fields are really useful for two reasons. One is they tend to divert the traffic around them, so the deer going to and from the food on the next property over are generally going to go around those grass fields, but sometimes they do cross them, especially if the grasses remain standing later into the October. You'll sometimes see them cross. I saw what I thought was a 5.5-year-old buck cross right across that grass field in the evening in October in 2015 season. They also, the second thing that they're really good for is chasing, especially this grass field back here. As you were walking along, there's another grass field just like that one back here, and that gets used for chasing day after day after day. And what happens is the doe behavior is they want to get rid of these younger bucks, and they will run back and forth across that field and run in big circles around it. And the bucks are chasing around them, and then they'll get down to one end and they look back, and they stand real still and they look back to see if they lost him. And what they're trying to do, in my opinion, is lay their scent down all over that field and get those young bucks confused, and then they'll go find some place to eat or lay down or whatever it is they want to do. But I've got just wonderful video of all the chasing going on up here, and it's a pleasure to sit here and watch that, and to know that you're going to see deer all day long, any time of the day. It's none of this stuff of coming out for a half an hour before dark, and that's the only time you're going to see deer. You're going to see deer moving in here all day long. This food plot will go, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it this year. We're going to walk through a brand new series of food plots that I've made in here. I hinge cut this woods in 2010. I've let it be a transition area for that time. Now I'm putting some food in there to get the deer spread out a little more. I want to distribute them across this whole wooded area here so that we have several doe groups that can move in parallel through here. This is a little bit too much of a funnel situation here for me. So that is all going to get beans, like I said earlier, and I'll spray it 2 or 3 times this year, and then I'll either put perennials or annuals in it next year. I'll put annuals in it in the fall.
In this area right here, or what you're doing over here?
Well, this is a right of way for the drainage. So I just keep this in a long continuous food plot. But I'll put, sometimes I plant branches across here to break up the sight lines. This year I'm going to put some Sudan grass in.
You got oats in here.
This is rye here.
Rye, rye and then
I think it's rye. Anybody know the difference between rye and wheat? It's either winter wheat or rye. Dan?
At this time of year, no. It looks kind of like rye. I don't know. This time of year,
I can't tell the difference.
No, the seed looks different.
I'm surprised that Doc Steve does.
My vote is wheat. Did you say wheat or rye?
It's either wheat or rye. I don't know which
tillers more. There's a lot more bunches here instead of 1 or 2. There's like 5 or 6.
It could be roost
You can see how much of this is being eaten by the deer now. That clump he just grabbed is all nibbled off the top. So they're
pretty much backing off the wheat and rye right now, though.
It's getting a little too tall for them. And,
not for my deer.
I'll decide what to do with this. I might kill it.
They love
I might plant some beans in here too.
3/4 of an inch tall.
Any question about anything you've seen or heard up to now?
That's it.
I walk right across that field right there. Yeah, I talked about it earlier, but if you didn't hear during my talk, I've never seen a deer in here in the morning for at least a half an hour after light, except one day on November 15th, several years ago, I saw a buck come running down through here and the heat had been spooked out. It was November 15th. But normally, I'm going to sit there and nothing's going to be happening for a half an hour. 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock is the prime time in the morning. In the evening, they will tarry here. But I'm going to come in midday. There might be some deer feeding down there by the bedding area. And I'll sneak across here, and I can usually get in there without them seeing me. The doe families are not too concerned about it.